We're smooth 98.1 FM. Good morning and welcome to Freshly Pressed. It is time to get into the local headlines this morning. And our in-house analyst is here ready to help us get a better perspective of the headline this morning. And of course, you are there looking forward to reading all of the messages you send reacting to the headlines this morning up on our WhatsApp platform 0809 444 0981 will be where we read the messages. And then, of course, you can catch a live stream of this freshly pressed on youtube.com/smooth 981 FM Lagos. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can as well go back and see past edition of Freshly Pressed. And then you can also tweet at smooth 981 FM. You can X at smooth 981 FM. But let's make welcome Chibuzor Nwaezeapu. Good morning to you, Chibuzor.
Good morning, Omatseye. Good morning, Lagos.
How did you make your way through the picketing lines and all of that? What's the streets looking like this morning, day two?
Day two, so obviously I had very restricted movements yesterday. I didn't go out much. But today we've had to make our way through the various fuel queues that have started picking up largely, obviously, because there's no power. And most people have to now resort back to get generating sets. Are trying to accumulate as much fuel as they need for the periods, obviously, and hopefully that fuel supply also would not be affected by the continued strike. So we are hoping for the best. As our first story, we talk about the ongoing discussions within the government and the various labor groups to try and get to some solution, at least for now.
It looks like a fun place for us to dig into our first story now. The Punch newspaper is what we pick up this morning, and the headline here reads:
Minimum wage. Federal government offers 60,000 naira labor may end strike. That's what the Punch newspaper reports. Chibuzor, does it look like this labor will bulge?
So my personal opinion on this strike is that I'm actually a bit saddened that it actually was allowed to happen. Why either wrong or right, most of us were aware of Labour's starting position in terms of negotiation and the numbers they were looking at. Mr. Ijero hadn't hidden it from the public here, taking every opportunity to knock out the amounts they were looking in terms of minimum wage. And the federal government had also said, obviously giving an insight, especially when even on the workers there, I think when the president made his speech, he also gave an insight to where the federal government was leaning towards. So it's quite interesting and quite sad that we actually allowed it to deteriorate to get to the date where the deadlines were given and we had to go in, even experience one day of strike because, this was something that was of extreme importance on paramount in a country that is looking to up its revenue. It's a lot in a country that is looking to improve its productivity. It's easier to shut some of these things down than to restart them because the impact of that time we've lost is equal to naira, dollars, and pounds, and whatever currency you want to look at. But let's go back to the point. So the federal government is holding on to its position about 60,000 naira, and Labour are at 494,000, which is obviously for everybody, that's a difference of over 400,000 naira. Obviously, for them to be able to meet some level of consensus, it's not likely they're going to meet at the middle of this point. So what the federal government is hoping in this instance is that Labour would accept its proposal and move forward, at least pause the strike for now, because like I told Omatseye earlier, we don't seem to ever end strikes in Nigeria. We just pause them and kick the problem down the road. They would come with the proposal of, we'll discuss this later in the future, but let's stop this for now. But what do we need to do? Because the government position is clear. The government doesn't have the funding to be able to pay up over 400,000. And on a personal note, as an individual and someone who's looked at a bit of history, I do not believe that minimum wage would solve anything. It would just mean, if you look at currently, one of the things that the CBN is trying to do to tackle inflation is actually reduce the amount of money in supply. So when you pay up a minimum wage at that rate, what you do is basically do the opposite of what the CBN is trying to achieve by flooding the market with new money if you're able to pay it up. So there is a problem where the government isn't able to pay. There is also the challenge of possible inflation in the future, to add to what we already have. And then there's the bigger thing that nobody wants to discuss. How are the states, the various constituent units of this country, and the president has been championing true federalism in the last week or two. How are the states going to be able to make these payments? How are they able to sustain it? Are they able to make these payments or sustain it? Because typically we used to have this assumption that, it's more expensive to live in particular cities like Lagos and so, but we've now, in the last few months, we've actually had access to look at, for instance, the inflation numbers and what food inflation is even higher in several places outside of Lagos.
Sorry, Kitty, and I was scared. I thought Kitty.
It's places like Kogi and you're wondering how this guy is surviving. Yes. So, and some of these states are states that habitually are unable to pay the minimum wages at 30,000 at the moment. So how do we solve that problem? At the end of the day, what we need to do is drive more increased productivity. But yes, let's solve the problem we have now in front of us. And this is not the anthem issues, but actual issues of cash in the pocket.
Now, Chibuzor, does it make sense to demand from your employer, if from the figures and from what you laid bare already, knowing you say the government can't even afford it? Now, does it make sense, or is it reasonable for labor to ask what it knows the employer cannot afford, or what, even if the employer can afford, the states now cannot afford?
In a rational world and in a rational, if you have a rational deliberation, you would probably try to keep your numbers as realistic as possible, where you can actually negotiate either back or forth from. And unfortunately, Labour says they've done their mathematics, they've done their calculations, and I think at one of their presentations, they actually brought something to try and prove, to actually show how they got to the numbers that they had. But, you can say it's neither here nor there. If everybody will want to live a comfortable life, pay rent, at ease, and be able to do that from the wages that they earn, but that's not the reality. So I don't think it's a rational decision by Labour to push the point that they have, and that's why I do expect that they would probably come down to closer to where the government is, or even at the point where the government is, and probably try to put some provisions in that agreement for the future that allows them to review those amounts going forward. But like I said, the major problem for Nigeria today is to increase its productivity. How do we get to that point? And Labour can be a partner in that discussion. At the moment, I don't think they are being partners in that discussion. I think they are working from outside, looking inwards and just demanding.
Now, this brings me, I want to draw into your vast knowledge of the historical struggles between Labour and government, which you hinted a while ago. Has there ever been a point in the history of Labour-government relations, or employer and Labour struggles, where there has never been this shove before government would have to look at the increases we've had in terms of the minimum wage historically now, from the Udoji days down till what we've got the minimum wage back in it? And has it always been characterized by struggles?
I can't recall an instance where the government on its own unilaterally decided to increase the minimum wage in recent times. I'll probably have to go back a bit in history and look through my archives again, but I can't recall. Typically, Labour has, this kind of back and forth and this kind of pushes are actually what have always led to increase the minimum, which is also a bit problematic. So if we want to look a bit at, things like when we look at the electricity tariffs and stuff like that, and I do know that, and even when we look at things like Ramfac and how they even allocate wages and salaries to particular where they have responsibilities for, there are processes towards reviewing wages from time to time. And what I expect to have is that we should get to that point, obviously, where wages are reviewed on a particular schedule, and it's actually defined, and we're going to have those reviews. But at the end of the day, if you have if you increase your wage from 1,000 naira to 100,000, and 100,000 is still able to buy what the 1,000 naira was buying, 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, you've really not made any progress. The idea is, how do you increase productivity? How can you get value to your currency? How can you battle inflation? How can you get the right pricing? How can you meet the needs of the people on ground? And typically that's where the government puts its positioning on when they try and push back on this. But like I said, Labour does have a position to take. Government has a position to take. We have to come in the middle.
It looks like at some point, Labour is looking at the government and saying, what you do or your actions are so loud that we cannot even hear what you're saying when you talk about paucity of funds
So,
in terms of lifestyle of government officials and spending.
I do say this a lot. A lot of what we have is a lot of dissociative cognizance. As the government is on one side, and it's and I have this this back and forth with a lot of friends, and we talk about how do you when you quantify the cost of government in naira and kobo terms, do some of these things we're saying for make any difference in terms of the bottom line? At some point, what Labour sees is they see the large convoys that turn out when the president is moving or when government officials are moving. They see the shutdown of roads and the many convoys that are able to pass through the roads when it happens. And what they see in the back of their mind is that people are spending money. They see the House debating about buying new cars, refurbishing their houses and how much they are going away with. They see government officials flying around. Either rightly or wrongly, what goes through the Labour's mind is more money is being spent. Now, you have to get to the point where Labour and Nigerian citizens understand that that everybody is in this boat together. It's not a cruise ship where some people are in the first class and we're at the bottom of the boat, and if everything sinks, the guys will get the safety wraps and the rest of us will have to just find a way out through the waters. We have to get to that point where Labour also understands that the government itself is the government and the officials are themselves part of this process in trying to right-size Nigeria, trying to cut costs where costs need to be optimize productivity where productivity needs to be optimized. And when we do all get that, and this like I said, I pointed to national anthem at the start, and one of the things when the president tried to talk about was it's more the new anthem. It's brings Nigeria more together. It talks about all the attributes of the anthem that the new anthem that they were introduced. But I say it's far more than the national anthem. What will bring Nigerians together is when they see that there's that country is just, that the country is fair, and there's an opportunity for every young Nigerian that is born in this country, and despite their backgrounds and where they come from. And until we get there, we'll still keep asking ourselves these questions.
Oh, let's reach out and see what the copy of the Vanguard is leading with this headline, where it talks about Nigeria to receive part 2.2 billion US dollars World Bank loan very soon, and that's credited to the Finance Minister Wale Edun.
So Nigeria is receiving a 2.25 billion USD loan from the World Bank at a rate of 1% interest rates. So the Minister for Finance mentioned that someone in the program on Tuesday mentioned that we will be receiving a part of this funding soon. He says it's virtually free money, and it's when we say free money, it's talking in terms of the interest rate being at 1%. The other part of this Nigerians would obviously like to know is, are there any terms and conditions attached to this fund? So, it could be free in terms of how much you're paying back, but is it free in terms of what you need to do and what challenges you can place in front of your citizens? So that's the question that needs to be answered, which, your guess is as good as mine. It said a large part of it, which is 1.5 billion, is what they call a developmental policy operation. And it's done in recognition of what has been done to stabilize the Nigerian economy and get it back on the spot. And the funding will come virtually immediately. I don't know if the writers of how the minister said it, but it just looks like very interesting words. So they are basically waiting for a board meeting by the World Bank, and after that, they expect that they would get the funding. And so he goes further to talk about things like how some multinationals have exited the country. And he said that, they are working, the current government, the present government is working to improve the environment to attract more multinationals into Nigeria. He gave the reasons why, possible reasons, one of the possible reasons why multinationals have exited has been the liquidity, of them not being liquid in the foreigners, not having enough liquidity in the forex market, which is true because a lot of these guys will bring in funds from outside the country and they want to be able to repatriate. They want to be able to get access to their funds when they need to. And that's a big challenge if you don't have a market that's large sized enough to meet those demands when they need to be met. He talks a lot about how he talks a bit about how the government is trying to improve the investment climate to attract more investors from outside the country and also make it better for them to stay. Um, you know, so he does a good job about talking about what the government is doing in terms of attracting and keeping them. I know in some other story there was some reference about how a lot of what is happening to the multinationals is not just about today's government, but about things that have been done previously, which I do agree with. In policies do take time to bed in. So obviously, if you had the negative impact on the previous negative policies from the previous government, you would have a flow through into the current government. So it also speaks to me about the continuity of government, and which is one thing that political parties sell to us when they try to bring in candidates from their parties to replace candidates from the previous parties. In more developed democracies, what we expect is some level of continuity. We expect some level of ideology in the political and the economic programs. But so far in Nigeria, we've not seen a lot of that. What we do see is candidates using parties as platforms, and we don't see the parties actually having any differentiating ideologies. So, the candidate from party X and party Y can probably sell in the same thing or will do the same thing in government, irrespective of what their party says they stand for. So, and this is one of the things that I would like to go back to back to historically, or like, well, the national anthem, and go back to the points where Nigerian parties were actually differentiated by some level of ideology. And if we want to change all things military, they'll probably look at how even the parties that we have now have originated from the same military hand. So we need to be careful when we are washing hands and changing clothes. We might have to change the entire wardrobe.
Well, it's still freshly pressed on Smooth 98.1 FM.
On the other side, we'll pick up reactions to the headlines and then pick up some more stories. Stay tuned.
Yeah, you funny.
And so we return. Let's quickly grab out the papers now. And first, let's see what your headlines are, the reactions to the headlines are looking like this morning. And let's go over to Linda from Yaba. Linda says, the strike will only be effective if National Assembly and ASORO are affected by not having power supply like the rest of us. Linda's thoughts from Yaba this morning. And Chunji comes up with a message saying, I don't know why there's so much fuss about a minimum wage that only affects about 5% of the population. How many persons do we have in the employ of the federal government that the rest of us have to suffer for it this way? And we know whatever the number is, it will not be paid to most Nigerians. All most people will get is increased inflation, Chunji's thought. And then we find a message from Dan Okudwa saying, there is no state that cannot pay the minimum wage if the governors can cut wastages and be prudent in the managing of state resources. The only problem is that the organized private sector may not be able to pay it because of the prevailing economic hardship facing manufacturers. And that's Barrister Dan Okudwa's thoughts from Igondo. And next we find this one from Idimapuza saying, federal government has not been fair with Nigerian workers. If president, the VP, the governors, deputies, and lawmakers could earn humongous salaries and allowances, I see no reason why at least 100,000 naira is not agreed as minimum wage for workers. That's wickedness. Idimapuza's thoughts from Surulere. And comes Adenike. Adenike Adeleye says, please, I can't get the drift of the guest talking about, okay, the ruling class is not in the same boat with the masses. Their very actions and remunerations shows that's what they are. That's what, I guess that's what you said.
That's what
we're all in the same boat, but then these people, they feel like they will get the rap.
Yeah, that's what basically what I'm saying and what I insist on is that for labor to appreciate where the government is, we all have to be in the same boat. At the moment, we're not in the same boat. At best, the analogy I use that at best we're in a cruiser where government and the officials are in the first class, while the rest of us are at the bottom and struggling to swim in the water as if it sinks, while they have the life raft. So that's the point I was trying to make. Yeah. So basically, and I just wanted to make a slight comment, which tied to what one of the people said. So in Nigeria, we have a very interesting situation. While you say like about 5%, and I'm not sure what the exact numbers are, that work under the federal government or the state governments who would directly benefit from an increase in wages. And I do have my own argument about inflation. What you do have in Nigeria is that when one person is paid a salary, he doesn't basically just earn that salary himself. There is a cascade down effect down to at least 3 or 4 people in his family around him who have to take that value. So it's not just one person being impacted. There's a multiplier effect. And also there's some expectation that that would be replicated at some level, maybe not at the exact level in the private sector. So that's, that's one part of it.
And conversely, using your argument also, the politicians too, where they receive this humongous pay for checks, also it cascades to that to families and
well, they does, which is one of the reasons why they keep defending why they keep doing what they are doing, because that they have to collect enough to be able to take care of their constituents, and people will still come to them to ask for more.
So the Guardian is next a port of call where the headline there screams Abia soldiers killing. Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives sets up Peace Fund panel.
So well, when he says Peace Fund when he says Peace Fund committee or panel, and actually look at the details in the story, talks more about a committee to help raise financial assistance for the victims of insecurity in the Southeast. So because what I expected when I saw the headline was, a committee to actually try and drive peace in the Southeast. So what is this? What are we talking about? Basically, we are still talking about the issues of, what has been a lot of people in the Southeast have been dealing with for a period of time now, where there's been some level of attack on the peace and the free movement of a lot of citizens within the Southeast, particularly by some splinter groups or some groups that are, I don't know how to even describe these groups again. So who are basically, but what we have is over the last few years, what has happened is that the lives of people, free movements and lives of people within the Southeast have been threatened by this particular group. They've restricted them from carrying on with their business on specific days, based on their own ideologies or based on their own visions. And they've actually had to, in several instances, such as this one, they've had to attack military or paramilitary officials who are in uniform. So what you do have is a state where I wouldn't say there's a complete breakdown of law and all that, but there's, people are more afraid of these groups than they are of the security forces in a lot of these areas. So what the deputy speaker is asking for is basically that, people have lost life, have lost their means, have been injured as a result of some of these activities, and we need some money to be able to help them get back on their feet, help pay for their medical bills, help support them, and we want to set up a fund to be able to do that. So he set up a panel after I paid a condolence visit to the 144 Battalion headquarters in Asha in Ukwa West. Sorry, I hope I'm not mispronouncing this. West Local Government of Abia State, where announced the setup of the committee. He also donated 10 million to kickstart the process. I'm always interested when public officials donate this amount, if it's coming from their official pockets or it's coming from personal accounts. But it's good to see that he's kickstarted the fund with 10 million. He's the chief press secretary of the deputy speaker, said that over 30 million has been contributed by well-meaning members of society, local here and abroad, after 24 hours after revealing the fund. So basically, that's what they are talking about. They were there to commiserate the army after there was a killing of 5 of their personnel by suspected gunmen in Abia State last Thursday. And, these are the issues of unknown gunmen, all these attacks. And we do hope we get to the point where we'll actually face these issues head on, either from a political perspective, a social perspective, or if there needs to be a mix of force. Because we can't keep living in a country where several parts, and this is not just in the Southeast, several parts of the country are reportedly under control or under attack by various other forces. There's no point in attracting investors if you can't tell them that their safety is completely guaranteed at everywhere they want to go within the country.
So let's go return to messages now, reacting to the headlines this morning. Anthony from Marine Beach says, regardless of what Labour is presenting to government, there seems to be a public perception of what is considered fair for a take-home pay at this point. Federal government should just up their bid to that level. And when they get there, Nigerians will know. They need to do this as fast as possible to avoid getting poor masses on the streets because the suffering is much. One important point is for government to checkmate market behavior after the offer. Otherwise, we'll return back to this in no time. All of the gains taken away by market forces reacting. Workers now have increased pay. Let's begin to do house rents and all of that. Transport. Moving on. Casey Michael tells us from a papa, I don't know why people are misconstruing the issues of the strike actions by the organized labor. The fight is not just minimum wage, but also hiking fuel pump price, which affects everyone. Please, let's get that straight. Okay. Now we find Gilbert Musa here with from Festac saying, one, on the minimum wage debate, other states' governors outside Lagos should work on generating profitable IGR. Also, government officials and our legislators should have salaries reviewed downwards. 160 million naira SUV for each lawmaker on Gilbert Musa's mind at this moment. Should they send it back right now? It's used already. Anyway, let's go on to Tajuddin from Alimasho reacting. He says, oh, besides the immediate family, in most cases, that's talking about legislators and public officials with fat pay. Their loot doesn't cascade. So it's for family and and that doesn't have multiplier effect. So let's go on to next one message from Judy. Judy says, I support Labour in their struggles, but they need to be realistic and also be ready to demand more productivity from government workers. That's it. Eyes on where the money is going. Rexy from Surulere tells us it's IPOB. What's there to describe? Why can't you just say their names? That's reacting to that story from Abia, where
I chose not to say the name because I didn't want to give them free airtime again. Yeah. I think they've gotten enough free airtime.
And then comes Abbas Oladipo saying, why is it so difficult? Oh, what's it?
So this is where the problem lies.
They had a backbeating on this one.
You probably made an assumption based on my name, and I would clearly state I have no issue mentioning any name. If that four-letter name, what I've said, and I've tried to restate it clearly, is that I'm not in the mood of giving them any free airtime. So it's not about where I hail from, which is a bit towards the south, not the southeast at the moment. But that's what it is.
Let's sort it out. But just help us touch on this one quickly, if you can. Doctors, and it's related to labor in a way. So let's just do that.
Story there where doctors are the ones talking here, where there's need to end casualization of what's that about? Okay, yes, NAT demands end to casualization of doctors from the Punch in a minute.
So it's sad. What NAT is talking about is the issue of employing doctors as casual staff. Now, what really is the concern with employing doctors as casual staff? In other countries, you do have consultants. In other countries, you have strong labor laws that ensure that whichever way you're employed, you have specific benefits, have tenure, you have all that you need to be able to progress in your career, and you move forward. What is happening here is that when you employ these doctors as casual staff, they don't have tenure, they don't have the benefits they will have as long-standing staff within the organizations. And what tends to happen is some of them remain in casual status for extremely long periods of time, which is actually where the issue is. If they were just there consulting for a specific short period of time, then yes, it would make sense to do that. But you can't have somebody who's a casual staff for 3 years, 4 years, and keep him in that state. And this is a country where we still need a lot of medical doctors. We don't have, based on United Nations ratios, we don't have the right number of doctors in our institutions, in our populations. We've lost a lot of doctors going abroad. So even the few ones you have here, why can't we just get it right and give them the right environment to work and the right environment to give their best?
All right, this is where we anchor now and say thank you so much to
Analyst this morning. Chibuzor Nwaezeapu for helping us break down the
issues on the headlines this morning. But I guess the Abbas Oladepo and Adeniro.
So let me mention this IPOB. Yes.
Okay.
You can find out the acronym if you don't know what it is, but I won't help you with that this morning.
All right, so that's where we'll leave it now. But I invite you especially because at 8:15, it will be time for us to get into everything related to entertainment, the gossip, the moves, who's doing what. Find out shortly at 8:15. Come along.
The headlines.